Shall we start, Dr. Adhikari?
Yes, anytime you're ready.
Awesome. I'm ready. Sama, can I go ahead?
I'll let you know. I'm just going live on Facebook.
Oh, got you. Just let me know.
We can start now, Dr. Khadka.
Okay, thank you very much, Sama. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening in Nepal, good afternoon here in London, and good morning in the US. On behalf of the organizing committee for the IIDS webinar series on politics, economy, and public policy, we warmly welcome you to episode 26. The title of the talk today is The Nepali Diaspora's Role in National Development. The speaker for this session is our distinguished guest for today, Dr. Ambika Adhikari, who is also a distinguished adjunct fellow with us at the IIDS. Dr. Ambika Adhikari is a principal planner at City of Tempe, Arizona, USA, heading its long-range planning division. He is also an occasional faculty associate at the School of Geographical Science and Urban Planning and a senior sustainability scientist at Arizona State University, which is also known as ASU. Earlier, Dr. Adhikari was a researcher professor at the School of Geographical Science and Urban Planning from 2014 till 2016, and research program and portfolio manager at ASU 2012 till 2016. Dr. Adhikari obtained a Doctor of Design, Urban Planning and Design from the prestigious Harvard University. He is also a graduate fellowship. He also obtained a graduate fellowship at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Adhikari has a BA in architecture from MS University of Baroda. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Adhikari with us again, who also presented last year. Some of the house rules, ladies and gentlemen, please mute your microphones when not speaking. During the Q&A, please raise your hand if you want to speak, or you can also type your questions in the chat box. If possible, turn your video on when asking questions. Please do not interrupt other people or attempt to speak over them. Unfortunately, our discussant for today pulled out at the last minute because of his travel. So I will be discussing Dr. Adhikari's presentation and paper today. I am an assistant professor here at the University of Essex in England. Before academia, I had two distinct backgrounds, professional backgrounds. I worked as an army officer with the Nepalese army for 14 years. And after that, I worked for the United Nations and the World Bank for almost 10 years. If you would like to know more about me, you can also visit my website. So thank you very much, Dr. Adhikari. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Khadka. So first of all, thanks to you and thanks to IIDS and the whole team of people for making this presentation possible and inviting me to discuss this idea. The diaspora topic is something which is very close to my heart because I've been a diaspora at least last 20 years, although I've been kind of putting my feet on both the boats, so to speak. I was partly in Nepal and US, Canada, but I was doing to and fro for a long time. I was kind of a global nomad for a while. So after having lived permanently outside Nepal for the last 20 years and having participated in many organizations and seeing how the diaspora works, I got interested in this topic because our diaspora number is growing. And then I was organizing seminars and workshops and symposiums and many of the meetings on the real ground, not only in terms of the theories. So this is something that I am keenly interested, and I think there's a growing interest, and I know IIDS the embassy of Nepalese embassy in DC and many organizations are now beginning to do surveys and research and so on this one. So I live in Arizona, like Professor Khadka said, and I have kind of written and published here and there quite a bit on the diaspora, mostly on the actual working on how these things operate, starting from 1991, when there was a meeting in College Park in Maryland, and Professor Mohan Narayan Shrestha then edited a book about the diaspora, and I began writing from then. The presentation today is mostly based on the paper that was published last year in October in the Journal of Policy Design and Practice by Taylor and Francis. And the title is The State of the Nepali Diaspora and Its Role in Nepal's Development. So basically, I will provide an overview of a number of things. It's a big topic. I will start that in 2020, the number of the defined diaspora globally was about 281 million, which is about 3.6 of the global population, percent of global population. That's a big number that continues to become diaspora who live their own countries and live somewhere else and still are culturally connected. And then the remittance, technology, knowledge transfer, philanthropy, and diplomacies are some of the key elements of the diaspora that I'll go into a little more in detail. And I'll provide examples of 3 countries, China, India, Korea, and then I'll dwell a little more in detail about Nepal on how the diaspora situation from both sides, from both the native country and the adopted countries are working on. And then I also do some kind of back of the envelope type of calculations on how many people from the Nepali diaspora are across the world. I'll go into a little more of that later on, but approximately my own calculations is approximately between 800,000 to 1 million almost are permanently settled in more developed countries in the world. And then we all know that between 2 to 3 million foreign workers of Nepali origin are in the Gulf and Malaysia and Korea at any time. Then I'll talk about the growing economic prowess of the Nepali diaspora. I'll actually give you a number on what I think is the total GDP of the diaspora living outside. And then I'll also argue that the diaspora's potential is still underutilized, and what are some of the policy recommendations that we can propose. So with that, on the first slide, I'm showing something from a World Bank study on how the amount of the remittance that is provided by the diaspora to their homeland is shown. Like, for example, you can see in 2021, from the Indian diaspora, 87 billion US dollar went back to India as a remittance alone. Of course, Pakistan is also a big number. This is only for South Asia. And in the absolute number, Nepal's is about $8.5 billion in 2021. But let's look at the right side in terms of the percentage of the GDP. Of course, this is not exactly a GDP when the diaspora send the money. You can include in the national accounting, but as a percentage of Nepal's GDP, Nepal was the highest in South Asia with almost 25% of the remittance accounting for almost 25% of Nepal's GDP in 2021. And then you can see other countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, the usual suspects. The global remittance flows are very important in terms of the development investments in developing countries. We talk a lot about foreign direct investment, where people invest in terms of business, personal investments, and so on. But the remittances are very large numbers. Actually, in 2021, again, this Rata et al. Is World Bank and UN organized study. They actually show that the remittances are 3 times as large as FDI. Then again, in terms of the foreign aid that many of the developing countries get, the IDA is an arm of the World Bank, as you know, which gives you a soft loan and the grant. So that kind of investment is also very important for developing countries. But the remittance, again, is very high. Remittances maybe about 10 times more than what the overseas development assistance was received in 2020 by many of these IDA eligible developing countries. So that tells you the importance of how big is remittance and how impactful is remittances in those countries. Now, in terms of the highest remittance flows in absolute numbers, there are some countries that we basically know from the news and everywhere. India is on top, China, Mexico, the Philippines, and Egypt in 2021 were the top 5 countries in terms of receiving large amount of remittances. India received a lot, even China about $60 billion annually, and Mexico $43 billion. Now, I discuss a little more in detail these 4 that I talked about, the diasporas of China, India, Korea, and Nepal. Of course, China is one of the countries that have been sending diasporas for a long, long time. So the Chinese group of diasporas are often divided into 2. One is called the old diaspora, who have kind of, stayed in the other countries for so long that they have kind of completely intermingled. They're in the mainstream, and sometimes it's only a little bit of a culture that Chinese. Some of them may not be totally well connected with today China, but that's changing. Then there's also a new diaspora, which is like, for example, the old diasporas are even the Chinese in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in the US, and Canada, and all that. But the new diaspora that is increasing in many of the more developed countries like Australia, and again, the new people coming in Canada and US that you hear a lot, those are very important contributors to China's rise that we see these days. And I'll talk a little detail on that one, especially how the returning students and people from investors from Taiwan, North America, Europe, and Asia became the engines and the drivers of the big rise that we see in China. India, of course, also has some sort of old diaspora for a long time because of the colonization, and British took a lot of Indians to many other countries, and they settled in, and some countries are actually almost majorities, like Suriname, Guyana, even Fiji, and Mauritius and other countries. But it's also, there is a changing pattern. Instead of going to do sugarcane and laying the railroads, now the Indian diaspora is like the information technology and medicine and high technology and all that. And as a matter of fact, we all South Asians sometimes look alike. So when some people meet people like us who are kind of almost dumb because we are from the Stone Age, they say, oh, you guys are so smart, you know, all the math and science. You know, that's the impression that they have of our kind of looks from South Asia in Europe and North America. Just as an anecdote on how the Indian diaspora's image has been turning around. Korea, of course, is also a very important diaspora. It's just an example that I've chosen. There are many other countries with a really interesting and important diaspora, but because of the limitation on the length of paper and presentation, another one that I have chosen is Korea, which has really inspired its diaspora to contribute to its development. And we know that Korea is one of the tigers in Asia. It's actually become a running tiger, and the diaspora has helped it a lot. Nepal is something that we'll focus a little more in the coming slides. We know that Nepal government is also now very much aware. The non-resident Nepali citizenship is in the card. It's already in the constitutions. And then, of course, there's a lot of remittance, investment, and tourism. Now, I've created a ladder. It's inspired by another study, but this is kind of my conceptualization of the stage of diaspora formation. When we just basically just say diaspora, not everything is a diaspora. When I talk about old and new, of course, that's another distinction. The other one is there is a range of the stage of the formation of diaspora, all the way from forming in the bottom, that we basically begin to form like a diaspora. That is my reading of the next diaspora right now. Then the next stage is something that is kind of more establishing, and then established, and then enhanced and mature. And the forming diaspora is mostly, the capacity is on the remittance, the vast majority like ours, even some other countries like Bangladesh and so on. Establishing also, in addition, the right hand, you have to read cumulatively. Anything that's below is also included. So they do philanthropic activities plus remittance. established, they begin investment. That's what happened in the 60s and 70s in India and China and so on. More advanced, go into knowledge and technology transfer that we begin to see again in today, China, India, Israel, many other countries. And then eventually when the diaspora become very mature, they go for institution building that we see the Jewish diaspora doing in Israel. And then of course, the top institution building will include all of the one below. There are also the people who continue to come and send remittances and so forth. So this is, I call this a ladder of diaspora contribution, and I divide them according to the stage of formation. Now, I go a little more into detail on the Nepali diaspora subgroups. Obviously, the first one is in India. The census in 2011 showed that almost 3 million Nepali-speaking Indian citizens live there. They are, by definition, diaspora. And then the seasonal, because the open border, it's hard to maintain any number. It's only anecdotal, but seasonally, I think about 1 million people go there every year, or 500,000 people go every year. And then a lot of students, sometimes not everyone talks about it, but lots of Nepalese students go to India because education is more stable, good, it's easy, no visa requirement, no complications, just pay the money and go. People go to places like Bangalore. Initially, people used to go small numbers, like in scholarship, like I went to MS University of Baroda on Colombo plan, but those used to be just a few hundred a year. Now people go 40, 50, 60,000 in sciences, technologies, medicine, even arts, anthropology, social sciences, and everyone, because India has a pretty good education system, easily accessible, relatively cheap, and good quality. So that's one number, but I don't really discuss that a lot because sometimes by definition, even when you go to Nepal government's definition of the non-resident Nepalese, India is not included because of the open border and because of many other things. But I'm putting it here just for the sake of information and data. Then the other group of Nepali diaspora in the formation is the students. I think there was a very quick conversation earlier on. It's pretty amazing how Nepalese students population in the world is increasing. In Australia, in 2041, there were like 60,000 Nepalese students, according to the Australian government's website. The Nepalese students were, I think, either second or third after China, India, and Nepal in Australia. That's I mean, I don't know if it's good or bad, but that's very impressive. It's also good in many ways. It's bad in some ways because we're losing a lot of Nepalese talents abroad, but that's how it is. Then again, in the US, it's pretty amazing. I mean, we are like the 40th country in terms of amount of population in the world, but we Nepalese students in the US are typically within top 10 or 11 by number, you know, after like China, India, and so on. More Nepalese students than from Pakistan, for example, which has like 8 times more population than Nepal's. And in developed countries, I go into a little more detail. I go to census data and other data and how many people that I can estimate. It's a very conservative estimate. The estimates are actually much more, people estimate much more than this. There are 300,000 Nepali diaspora in North America, US and Canada. And then I estimate 550,000 in rest of the developed world, like Australia, Europe, Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong. As you know, many countries have begun to give permanent residency and citizenship. Even places like Japan and Korea and Hong Kong do that. I'll go into a little more detail on that one, but you know, that's a big number. Then of course, migrant workers. Some definition of diaspora captures that also. Otherwise, diasporas are permanently settled people who maintain certain cultural connection with the previous country, their home country, and also are easily recognizable. But even people who go for 2-3 years at a time, we can also count them in diaspora. And that's a very large number. Sometimes people inflate that to 4, 5, 6 million people. And it's hard to estimate because when people go, there's a record, but when people come back, there's no record. So when Nepalese people live like 200 people every day or 2,000 people every day, we know that. But when people come in, that's not accounted. But my estimation from the Chamber of Commerce and the 2022 census and so on is at any time, there are easily between 2 to 3 million migrant workers outside. And all of these numbers, if people have better data, we can always kind of refine them. but I'm just doing some initial things. And here is some initial estimates again of the permanent Nepali diaspora in the world. In North America, 250,000 and another 50,000, 300,000. Oceania, you calculate mainly New Zealand, Australia. This is again pretty conservative because in Australia alone, I think the census shows about 120,000 Nepalese. There are like 5,000 in New Zealand. Fiji, they've been Nepalese for a long time, the last 150 years, anywhere between 7 to 10,000 or even more. So, you know, there are many countries where people live there permanently. And we know that in Europe, probably Professor Khadka and other people can really correct me, this probably number is even larger, because I know that even in UK alone, it's about 130,000 people who have settled. And there are people in Germany, Portugal, you know, I read in the papers, 70,000 people there and so on, but 250,000 is a conservative estimate. Again, in East Asia, we know we have some of the numbers, like we have numbers in Hong Kong, permanent residents who were provided after the British left in 1999, there was like 70,000. And then of course, there are people who live in Korea, Japan, and then there are old diaspora in Malaysia and in Singapore and Hong Kong because of the British Gurkhas. All of that about 150,000. So total in 2021 or 22 was about 800,000. It's probably higher than that. I would say safely that we can almost think of 1 million people living permanently outside. Go into a little more detail in North America. We have actual numbers from census from 2000 on. It's drastically going up. There have been census numbers, there are research studies and numbers, and Canada is also, in Canada also, the number is drastically increasing. It's easily between 250,000 to 500,000. Professor Dr. Hari Bhandari, who is also a member of Legislative Assembly in Maryland, did his PhD mostly on the Nepali diaspora's political role in America. His estimate is actually even 500 to 600,000 at least in America alone. So I here again, back of the envelope calculation, I must do the disclaimer. I am not an economist, I'm an architect and urban planner, but the simple calculation shows that the number of people living outside and approximating it from the household surveys and their income and averaging incomes out, I think the total diaspora outside has the same amount of the annual income as the annual income or the gross domestic product in Nepal, which is about $34 billion according to World Bank data in 2021. And that's the GDP of Nepal. And if you add up the total incomes, annual incomes of the diaspora outside, like in the US and Canada a lot, and then the other settled diasporas and the migrant workers, it is the same $34 billion. So not that all of that money is available, but I'm just giving you a hint that the diaspora settling outside has a pretty strong and important economic muscle. We used to oftentimes read, you know, there are more Irish than in America than in Ireland, and even about, you know, Poland and many other countries who used to talk about how strong their diaspora is in the US, Canada, UK, in Chicago. That is the kind of thing that I just wanted to give you some highlight about the economic muscle of Nepali diaspora. Now, how the diasporas are doing abroad. They are still, like I said, in the formative stages. They do events, they form associations, they have professional groups, they take initiatives to do investment, philanthropy, and institution building in Nepal. And in the adopted countries, that's another side of the coin that we need to discuss, because if you do well in the adopted countries, then you can do well in terms of helping your native land if you want. And so they begin to do well. In UK, we know that many are mayors and vice mayors and council people and business people. Same thing in Australia, we know that the 160th richest person is of Nepali origin. Same thing in US and Canada. People have begun to hold public offices, like I told you about one of the members of the state assembly. There are vice mayors. There are members of the city council, which are very important positions. It's a very highly decentralized country in America. So people are holding positions and people are doing well in terms of business establishment And academia, people have become deans, vice president of major universities, like the university system in California, and so forth. So that strength is also gradually growing. And the Nepal government's track record of engaging diaspora, of course, is mixed. We know, I mean, Nepal itself is going through a lot of transitional politics, but still, Nepal government has been forward-looking in some extent. 2064 Bikram Samvat, there was a Non-Resident Nepalese Act. The person of Nepalese origin and non-resident Nepalese ID cards began to get provided after 2064. Which is about 2008, 9, 10. And then there was a brain gain center that the previous minister, Gyawali, had started. As you know, when the party changed in Nepal, those institutions do not continue well sometimes. It's in limbo right now. But there was an official start of the brain drain center to attract diaspora capacities within the foreign ministry. Most important, of course, being the 2015 Nepali Constitution, which has a provision for NRN citizenship, which basically says anyone living outside the SAARC and gives you a benefit of 3 generations where people have been originally Nepali citizens, can become non-resident, eligible to get non-resident citizenship. And they would enjoy all the other rights, economic, social, and cultural, as per the law, besides political. So that has been the provision in the Constitution, still has to be translated into action and the laws. But as we read in the news, it's a kind of ongoing discussion. Now, there are many barriers to engaging the Nepali diaspora in Nepal's development. It's a little hard to read because I kind of basically just wanted to give you an example. But there are many areas, like I have talked about remittances, leadership in academia, business investment, and so on. This table will actually continue very long. It's only the top part that I'm showing. And then for each one of them, there are perceptions on both sides. There are perceptions on the diaspora groups. There are perceptions in the leaders and policymakers in the native country. And then what are some of the barriers because of that? So just as an example, obviously, on the remittances, the perception of the diaspora group is, it's giving blood, sweat, and tears, and sometimes even life. So many people die, but they do it anyway because they do it for the family and so on. The Nepali leaders often appreciate that because it looks okay, but obviously that we hear that they also extract rent from many of these people that they don't always get the benefit from the government. And the official banking transaction and so on are being touted, but still on the way to go. But many other areas, like taking leadership in public institutions, the diaspora group are interested. They're willing to take, I would say, cut in the salary, usually up to 25% of what they make outside as a rule of thumb. But the perception in the leader and policymakers in native countries is sometimes not always positive. They think, oh, they're competing and taking my share. That happened in the Open University of Nepal. I was also involved. We proposed someone who had lived in Canada for a long time to take the leadership of the Open University of Nepal that the diaspora initiated. But eventually in Nepal, that didn't work out, for citizenship reason, for party politics reason, and so on. And same thing happens on business investment and other places also. You're welcome as long as you don't threaten the establishment. But sometimes there is also a sense of competition and rivalry from Nepal. So those are the kind of psychological and other barriers that need to be worked upon. Now there's another table, if that was hard to read. Now this is even harder to read, but don't worry. I'm not going to read this, but I am just creating a table that potential area of diaspora engagement on the left column. Again, the remittances, businesses, and so on. And that continue on to the perception and barriers on how all of that things work. Oftentimes, the diaspora sometimes want to become like the gray Peace Corps. When they retire, they want to go back. They will also feel good to connect culturally, and they can also give back. We can see in India and many other countries, those groups might be welcome. But we heard even one minister a long time ago in Nepal said that, well, some of these diaspora groups should be kind of thrown into Narayani River. So, so there are all kinds of perceptions that we need to kind of tackle on. Obviously, things are changing in Nepal also. But on philanthropy, generally, there's a welcome sign. But whenever you want to take some leadership, there's always a conflict. Like one very highly professional person who wanted to go back in Nepal and do politics, somebody called him like, tourist candidate. So that doesn't help, right? That doesn't help in bringing the talents in. Now, how can the diaspora engage in development? There are a few questions that I kind of go into a little more detail into the paper. Obviously, you got to strengthen yourself. You got to stand on your own feet. You got to have the capacity, and you have to be financially and organizationally sustainable. This is something that I saw in the Chinese and many other diaspora, Mexican and Filipino. They've got really strong foundation institutions and so on to protect their interest, both by their government, native government, and also outside. And that has really helped to project their capacity into the benefit of their homelands. And so that's very important for Nepal also. In the formative stage, the Nepali diaspora, obviously the organizations have to be important. And the professional and academic interest group formation is very important, which is beginning to happen right now. And then we begin to create some database, who is who, what do we have. Unless you can measure, you cannot manage, as they say, right? So the involvement in academia, professional association, business and industry organization, and civil society in Nepal is extremely important. Many of us have begun to do that, but that is like an open field and a low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Continuing on, the communication with the native organizations is very important. And obviously the work of Nepali government is also very important. The Brain Gain Center was a good example, should be revived, because that was one of the things that was really backed by the power of the government. India had like a dedicated government ministry to look after the interest of the diaspora and also to look after how the diaspora can invest in India. That used to be called the Indian government's Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. In 2017, I think they changed it. They closed it, but now they do have departments to look after the benefits of the diaspora. Continuing on, diaspora, oftentimes there could be intangible elements that can help the diaspora. One is, of course, the recognition. India has every other year, they have an NRI Day, Non-Resident India Day. Nepal also has, in October, there's a celebration of the NRNs, Non-Resident Nepalese Day. And then the bridge, the diaspora sentiments and intimate knowledge of the home turf can be very important on many development activities that Nepal government does and utilizes international organizations. Those consultants that have walked barefoot in the hills of Nepal, know the language, have experienced the poverty firsthand, have relationship, and know the sentiment and culture can be really good, much better consultants than someone who just goes there, flies there, stays in the hotel and writes reports. And that's something that we really need to recognize from both sides. And it's very easy. World Bank, ADB, many of the UN organizations, Nepal government can basically ask, hey, at least have some of this, because we know there's a database. We know there's expertise in this area. There's expertise in water supply, urban planning, high technology. You can bring some of those people in the field. They can even be made part of the agreement that the government does with the international financial institutions. Many countries, actually, I think at least 20 or 25 countries allow their diaspora to be represented in their parliaments and in the government. Countries like France, Italy, even African countries like Senegal, Algeria, Portugal, they have a diaspora representation. Only diaspora can vote, and then the diaspora members could be members of the parliament in their government. And that's, I think, we've got a long way on that one in Nepal to go, but that's one part of really connecting. When you have a large number of people whose life affect and impact the development in your country, and then whose support is also important, why not bring them into the fold of the political process? Many countries have done it. Countries like ours, Senegal and so on have done it. Algeria has done it. Something that at least we can begin to think about. I know it's not going to happen right now, but something to think about. Because the overseas, the Nepali NRN citizenship now doesn't give political right, but this is only the first step. Then, of course, institutions. I talked a little bit about earlier on how the established diasporas like Korea, Mexico, and China have really strong institutions for their own welfare. I know a long time ago in India, there was like a Gurkha Welfare Council, but these countries that I'm talking about here, Korea, Mexico, China, Philippines, and so on, have really strong and big foundations and institutions, oftentimes supported by the native government, oftentimes by the people outside, that really help train and channelize energy and information. Then many countries are also doing what are called diaspora financial bond. People can contribute, reap good benefit. Remember that big the GDP that I showed from outside. Let's say people usually contribute 5 to 10% of their earning into savings for their own benefit. Now, if there are bonds that are secured by the government of Nepal and pay good interest, why not? Those money can really help fund the infrastructure in Nepal. And then the diaspora can also feel good that they're contributing towards development in Nepal, and also personally also gain that it is a secure bond investment that they've done. Visibility, I talked about it. Now, the policy implication for other countries, the kind of theoretical framework that I had begun with the ladder of diaspora, the different options, is also very interesting for other countries. And these 4 countries comparison that I talked about, India, China, Korea, and Nepal, of course, the Indian institutional and organizational mechanism within the diaspora are very strong, but India doesn't have one coherent like the non-resident Nepalese association that Nepal had. Of course, that's a different topic, the pluses and minuses of that particular organization, but we had one organization, we still have one. Indian diaspora organizations are much more nuanced and divided by culture and divided by profession and so on. They're very well established. Indo-Canadian Business Chamber, which is really high profile in Canada, for example, Indo-Australian Friendship Council, Great Britain, and all that. Chinese, of course, have much more numerous profession and culture related groups. Chinese American Citizen Alliance, Organization of Chinese Americans, many things like that. In Canada, the Chinese Canadian National Council is a very big organization. Korea also has Korea Economic Institutions of America, Korea Society, Korean Canadian Cultural Association, a number of things. Nepal, I give some examples of many socio-cultural and then professional and diaspora organizations. Examples are Nepali Society of Nepali Engineers, American Society of Nepalese Engineers, American Nepal Medical Foundation, Non-Resident Nepali Association, of course, in US and Canada, Nurses Association, Nepal Policy Institute, Nepal Britain Society. A number of them have begun to form from the diaspora side. Again, the 4th country comparison, what is happening in the native countries to entice the diaspora and to really bring them into the fold. Again, India has many benefits provided. They provided the person of Indian origin card, the overseas citizenship of India card, lots of benefits, except political, almost all the rights are given, and it's very easy. You can just get it on the airport. And then we celebrate non-resident India Day. There is a dedicated sale up for the non-resident Indians at the Ministry of External Affairs. And then there are Indian development foundations and so on. China, of course, has similarly, China is also contemplating what is called the Chinese card, similar to residency card for overseas Chinese, and the waiver of the, in China, you need a permit to live in the city. For the non-residents, there's a waiver that's called Hukao system. So China, of course, has a lot of these concessional and attractive opportunities for diaspora. Korea is even more interesting. They do give overseas citizenship, which is a non-territorial type of citizenship, was given in 1999. It gives you a lot of benefits to study and do language in Korea. And of course, Korea is also losing population, so they really want all these people to come in and help them. In Nepal, good start. We have the NRN ID card I spoke about. NRN Act of that 2064, which translate into 2007, 2009 in Gregorian calendar. There's a visa-free entry. October, there's an NRN Day. There is a small cell within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and so on. So in terms of the institution, in terms of the recommendation, this is my final slide. With all these discussions that I just did, the institutional strengthening of diaspora organization is very important. If we are not strong, we cannot contribute. If we are not standing on our own feet, the diaspora cannot do much, because we're still a lot of the Nepalese diaspora is still trying to make a living outside. But there will be a group, slightly older group of diaspora who is more in a capable situation. And then the professional diaspora group formation is also very important. Not only the socio-cultural, but professional organizations are very important. The database is that the diaspora groups have begun to do it. Even Nepal Academy of Science and Technology has begun to do it. They published a book. That will help. Then you can see who is doing what. You know, there are Nepalese diaspora in NASA, for example, National Space and Aerospace Administration, big governments, big universities, science, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, all of that are the resources for the richness of the Nepali diaspora. And then engaging with Nepal's institutions like universities, Council of Chamber of Commerce, and then civil society, professional organizations like Medical Association, Nepali Engineers Association, is what will give a foothold, and you can really do a groundwork collaboration. Then creating platforms for engagement, like I talked about the Brain Drain Center, and those kind of platforms in Nepal are important. And the dedicated ministry, like what used to be the Ministry of Overseas and Affairs, is very important. So that's my quick presentation. The actual paper, the link is here. It's an open access paper. It's called the Nepali Diaspora's Role in National Development, October 2022, on the Journal of Policy Design and Practice that you can even search. So Dr. Khadka, thanks again. I spoke quite a bit, but I'm very happy to respond, discuss, or do any other questions. But back to you, Dr. Khadka.
Awesome, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much. What I'll do is I'll just quickly summarize the paper, if that's okay. And then we'll open the forum for any questions and answers. Is that okay?
Sure.
So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Adhikari, for such an interesting presentation on a very important topic, especially given where Nepal stands today regarding its diaspora population. In the presentation, you talked about many ways in which the diaspora can contribute to development. And I'd like to summarize by highlighting what I think are two direct impacts. So let me first begin by, highlighting, the tremendous impact to remittances, right? So I'll just bring up some numbers. So according to the World Bank, remittances to developing countries, as you highlighted, reached a record high of almost $600 billion in 2021, right? But your second slide is even more important because it has Nepal as the fourth largest in terms of real numbers, $8.5 billion in terms of total figures, right? But that slide also tells us a different story. Because in terms of total GDP share amongst the countries in South Asia, Nepal is actually number one, and an astounding figure of almost 25% of total GDP. Right, so you can tell how important remittances is to Nepal, from the diaspora population. And what's also more important is that money can be used directly for investment purposes. That's what we think about when talking about remittances. But these funds can also be used for a variety of other purposes, right? For example, I study social capital, so that money can be used to support education, start small business, by family members, wives, or husbands, or, fathers, mothers, right? or even building a home, right? So I think the direct contribution in terms of remittances is remarkable, but also, what that brings to these rural communities is, quite extraordinary as well. The second point, Dr. Adhikari, is related to, investment, right? Because you cleverly also showed us the different stratas in terms of diaspora. So diaspora members that have, chosen to live abroad and only visit Nepal occasionally can still invest in businesses or other projects, right? In, Nepal, for example, we are beginning to see that. And by doing so, they create jobs and contribute to economic growth, right? For example, the big hotel right next to the palace. Whenever I drive by, I immediately think of, Mr. Kale, right? And they also bring new ideas and technology, which you highlighted, right, from their adopted country all over the world, that can be applied in some ways, back in Nepal. In fact, some of my school friends, from St. Javiers have already started, IT business, where they develop, tailor-made softwares in Nepal and export it to different countries, not just the US, right? Australia, UK, all these countries. But then, I'd also like to highlight two other types of, impact, which are beginning to surface. So we talked about remittance, we talked about investment, but what about other, types of, impact, which also you highlighted? So the first is related to the skills and knowledge transfer. Right? So diaspora members can also contribute to development by sharing their skills and knowledge. For example, when going through your paper, I immediately thought about, the medical field. So people like Dr. Bhagwan Koirala, who returned, and is able to help improve Nepal's healthcare, like in a quite remarkable way. Right? Or people who want to invest in education, or people who want to invest in, let's say the tourism business, right? So they're in some ways transferring their skills and knowledge, back to Nepal, right? By sharing their expertise. So hopefully the government of Nepal is also able to use your expertise, Dr. Adhikari, someday soon. The second, and which is quite, remarkable, because this forced me to think, is related to advocacy, right? In fact, diaspora members can also advocate, for their home country in their adopted country, or, or at the international stage, right? They can raise awareness about issues, facing their home country, or work to influence, policy decisions that can benefit their home country, right? And I see this happening a lot among the Indian diaspora in places I've lived and worked, let's say in New York or in London. But, I think it's really important that the Nepali diaspora also, has started doing this. Right? For example, I've been given my military background. I was in a conference in New York last week at a very high-level UN conferences. In a UN conference. In fact, it was related to my academic work, but because of my background, many of the UN folks were really interested in Nepal's contribution to peacekeeping. So in fact, I in many ways also did my part in trying to advocate how good the Nepalese soldiers are, and how good, peacekeepers they make. So, something like that, just giving an example. But, we've talked about the benefits, but however, you've also highlighted, obvious challenges, right? And these are huge challenges, as, you've highlighted. And I think these are some of these challenges really need to be addressed by the government of Nepal in order to, let's say, optimize this unique, opportunity. What I would also say, like this unique window of opportunity. And some of the, challenges is directly related to what you, highlighted, which is, political instability, right? The political instability in Nepal is, I'm sure, making it very difficult for diaspora, community to contribute to development, right? In some cases, the diaspora may be hesitant to invest or send remittances if they perceive that the situation back home is unstable or unsafe, right? And I say this because, again, from my experience, last week in New York, I went out, for a dinner with my Nepali American friends. There were quite a few of them. And almost all of them cited political instability as the number one concern for them to invest in Nepal, right? And I actually consider Nepal home. I travel back to Nepal, 4 times a year. I'm actually, heading back this Thursday. So I in fact requested, that you guys should invest back in Nepal. That's where home is. But, they cited political instability, right? And this, I believe, leads to 2 more points, right? So the first is, I think this instability is developing this lack of trust, which you also highlighted, right? Because one challenge that this has led to is in terms of investment again, right? So they're hesitant to send remittance, not only sending remittances, but also like investing in large amounts, right? Because they do not trust the government fully to use the funds properly, right? Because don't forget, the diaspora committee cannot be in Nepal 24/7, right? So the idea is that trust is really needed, right? Are my funds that I'm investing properly being utilized, right? Because mind you, the engine of economic growth, dear listeners, dear members, is actually private investment in growth industries, right? And not simply investing in, let's say, unfortunately, this inflated real estate market back in Nepal, right? So the money needs to be invested in private, growth industries, right? Big industries. But also, more importantly, this instability is also leading to some, legal and regulatory barriers, right? You've given examples of what Australia has done, what China has done, what South Korea has done, and at the bottom of the slide, I noticed what Nepal has done, right? But I think the Nepali diaspora members continue facing legal and regulatory barriers, right? That's making it very difficult for them to invest, right? So these barriers could include, not only investment, but also, the amount of money that can be sent, the amount of money that you can, take back, right? So I think the government of Nepal, though, is trying to do this. I think some of these points really need to be addressed as quickly as possible in order to not to miss this window of opportunity. So having said that, Dr. Adhikari, I really would like to thank you for such a brilliant presentation. And if you've got any comments that I highlighted in my discussant phase, this part, please feel free to address these. Otherwise, let's open the forum for any questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khadka. I think that was an excellent summary. Thank you so much for adding a few really important comments that I took to my heart. We can go for questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, any questions, feel free to type them or raise your hand. If you are asking any questions, it would be good to see your faces also. Go ahead, please. Any questions?
There's a couple of questions on chat box. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Ram Acharya, please go ahead, sir.
Okay, so I was waiting if somebody will jump in first. So let me start. Thank you for the presentation for, I guess, the diaspora role in Nepal. I have two, I think, a couple of comments. Number one, being an economist, I'm in economics background. So to me, I think remittance is good, but I think that to appreciate it in a way that the government policy has been very adaptive to the flow of remittance is an important issue. We should never forget. I will not be surprised if the very well done paper shows more hollowing out of Nepal intellectuals and investment and industry because of remittances. Nothing wrong with the diaspora group, but wrong with the government policy that has not changed in the last 20 years, even if that massive inflow of foreign money, which is not related to Nepal's production at all, right? So that's one thing that we need to be very careful. The second thing I would say, the five stages you showed, which is a good thing, but I think that somehow it gives the wrong notion that they have the stage that country had to go, your remittances to investment, to maturity, to institutional building. It may not never go that way. Remember when we were young, 30, 40, 50 years ago, Philippines used to get a lot of remittances. It has gone nowhere. So we may not rise on the ladder of those things, and it may not go that way. Sometimes even remittances country, like India and China, they had some remittances and they jumped in their growth process. I think what is important is diaspora is a small tell. It's the country's policy. I always do not like Nepali government giving special hands to our investment, to our skills, but to open the economy to everybody else, every capitalist in the world, let them invest in that country if they want to invest. I think the problem is the bureaucracy, the barriers. We are in between India and China, the best brain in the world, the most exciting place in the world now, the most place where the growth is happening. But look, inside, we are always fighting, right? And to me, I think there are both of us, we diaspora are also responsible. Not only politicians, we diaspora think we know everything about Nepal. We can fix Nepal in 6 months. I think that our upside of our ignorance. We cannot fix Nepal in 6 weeks. So in other words, I think we have to be capable, as I think the Dr. Adhikari pointed out, we have to be capable in what we are doing. If you see the Nepali diaspora, the organization, when it comes to the cultural aspect, singing, dancing, we are very good. But when you come to professional, I have hard time to find very professional institutions who are dedicated thinking about their profession, dedicated thinking about their what we are doing, and dedicated thinking about what are the issues in Nepal that we can solve in academic or skill policy way. I think so. We have to be very grounded as well. We have to think where we stand as a diaspora. And particularly, I think including me, I'm not putting out. We have to be very careful. And in a way, spend more time understanding Nepal. We do not understand Nepal. It's a complex. Any country is a complex. Policy making is a complex. There are unintended consequences. So I think this is the beginning. I think this mainly, I think, is still no matter how many Nepalese are out, unless the government institution we can change, unless there are some liberal way to look at the economy and to grow, I think our impact will be limited. So our efforts should be, to write on the way we like, to make the policy changes, to discuss. That's the, I think, way I see myself, that will help to Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya. Would you want to respond to some of Dr. Acharya's comments, Dr. Adhikari?
No, those comments are well taken, Dr. Khadka. Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Any questions?
I think questions are given in the chat. I can see some questions over there.
Yeah, somehow, do you mind reading some of the questions? Something funny is happening to my computer, please.
I can see it, I can do it, or maybe does somebody else wants to read it?
Yeah, sure, I can read it out.
Please.
We got the first question from Vibhav Pradhan. Why has the Nepali state consistently pushed back on the idea of providing A, dual citizenship, B, mail-in voting during elections for Nepali citizens abroad? Apart from the logistical financial challenges, what are the other possible reasons?
So I'm not in the best position to respond to that. If someone is here from the government, they can talk about it, but I can speculate a few things. The Nepalese diaspora looked for actual real dual citizenship in the beginning, but we knew that it was not possible in the first step because of many other concerns, open border with India, the security, and so on. And India itself, because of its security concerns, has given overseas citizenship similar to what Nepal is proposing. But India's case is somewhat different. There are movements to undermine India's sovereignty outside India. So I think they were a little more cautious. But in Nepal, I think that is the first step. A second step, later on it might happen. I am a proponent of dual citizenship. Some 60 countries in the world provide full-fledged dual citizenship. So that would be kind of my response. There was a second part of that question. Let me see. Second part was the logistic financial challenge, other reasons for the voting. Yeah, of course, on the voting, the Supreme Court has already asked. So there are two types of diasporas outside. One who hold Nepali citizenship, they can vote. One who hold foreign citizenship, right now they cannot vote just by law. But for the people who hold Nepalese citizenship, which is the large majority of the Nepalese diaspora outside, especially the migrant workers and so on, their say should be very important in Nepal's case because their fate and their work is impacted by the policies in Nepal. The Supreme Court in 2018 had mandated the government, but the government being slow is still working on it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll quickly go to the next question, Dr. Adhikari. There's one by Mr. Ganesh Adhikari. I'll not go into this because it's related to banking, which I think isn't your field. So I'm really sorry, Mr. Adhikari. Let's jump to the next question by Mr. Tulsi Tharel. So he's asking, I want to know more about what could be Nepal's global strategies to develop Nepal's brand image. As a marketer, I think Nepal needs to have a strong brand image strategy to get international traction. Can you please share some of your thoughts?
Well, Dr. Tharel, I know you are a professor of marketing, and this is a very important question that you put. And I know you've also opened up a Nepali marketing association in Nepal for businesses. Nepal does do a lot of marketing, from its posters to visit Nepal's to even in terms of investment, like India has Make in India. Nepal is also called open for investment. Obviously, it could be made stronger, but like everything else, things go in tandem. We have so many basic issues in Nepal that marketing is still in the progress, I suppose. But I fully agree with you and appreciate with you that people who want to invest and do things in Nepal can do that in Nepal. Nepal's branding and image is more for tourism right now, which is important. But for investment, education, and like the medical tourism and so on, I think we can enhance that marketing. I appreciate that question.
Right. So we can notice two hands up. So let's go first to Dr. Ramesh Maske. Over to you, sir. We cannot hear you, sir. I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm here. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Adhikari. Sorry, I just realized that you have invited me to join this very important meeting. But the last slides I could catch, and here I also joined with Ram Acharya, who mentioned that we can fix in 6 months the Nepalese problems. I didn't understand how this in 6 months can be fixed by the diaspora. We have diaspora coming back to Nepal, want to do something in political fields, still facing so many problems. The remittance alone, I think, yeah, we can also talk in Nepali, right?
Yeah,
everybody's Nepali. So let me.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. म पनि कुनै समय डायस्पोरा थिएँ, जर्मनीबाट म करिब 12 वर्ष बसेर नेपाल फर्केको। र मेरो सेन्समा के थियो भने नेपाल बनाउनु छ भने नेपालमै आएर काम गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने सेन्स थियो त्यतिखेर, हैन? र नेपाल बनाउनु छ भनेर फर्के म पनि। प्रोफेसर भएँ, यहाँ काम गरेँ, अहिले म रिटायर काठमाडौँ युनिभर्सिटीबाट, अनि म एकाडेमिसियन मास्टर छु। हामीलाई थाहा छ नेपालमा आएर काम गर्न सजिलो त छैन। हामी बाहिर मैले देखिरहेको छु डायस्पोराहरू बसेको हुन्छ। मैले त्यो तपाईहरुको कहानी मैले तपाईहरुलाई थाहा छँदैछ, तर हामी यो जुन किसिमले ब्रेन स्टर्मिङ गरिरहेछौँ नि, यो एकदम इम्पोर्टेन्ट कुरा हो। तर ब्रेन स्टर्मिङ त्यो स्टेजमा त्यहाँ गएकाहरूबाट भइरहेको देखिँदैन। नेपालको लागि उहाँहरूले ब्रेन स्टर्मिङ त गर्नुहुन्छ, तर वास्तवमा नेपालको लागि काम भइरहेको छ या छैन भन्ने कुराको जजमेन्ट तपाईहरुले गर्नुपर्छ होला। तपाईहरु अब एकदम पोजिसनमा हुनुहुन्छ र यो कुराहरूले तपाईहरु अब युनिभर्सिटीमा रिसर्च फिल्डमा आफ्नो किसिमको ठाउँमा हुनुहुन्छ। म यो हदमा छुइनँ कि अहिले डायस्पोरा नेपालमै आएर काम गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने छैन, तर म ब्रेन पुलिङ, हाउ टु गेन द ड्रेन्ड ब्रेन भन्ने कुरा गर्थेँ मैले जर्मनीमा हुँदाखेरि। अहिले मैले भन्छ हाउ टु सर्कुलेट द ब्रेन। मैले अब त्यसलाई गेन गर्न फर्क वैज्ञानिक नेपालमा भन्ने आदि कुराहरूको म पछि छैन। जहाँ जो जस्तो अवस्थामा छन् उहाँहरूले केही कन्ट्रिब्युसन गर्नुभएको छ भने त्यसको लागि हामी त्यो ब्रेन सर्कुलेसनको कुराहरू गरिरहेछौँ। अब मेरो डाक्टर अधिकारीले के भन्नुभयो लास्टमा चाहिँ नि, अब यो रोल अफ डायस्पोराको कुरा गरिरहनुपर्छ। नेपालको साइन्स एन्ड टेक्नोलोजी, म फेरि इन्जिनियर, साइन्सको कुरा टेक्नोलोजीको कुरा गर्छु। यसलाई यो साइन्स र टेक्नोलोजीको आधारमा हामीले नेपालमा काम गर्न सकेनौँ भने धेरै कुराहरूमा, इन्डस्ट्रियल कुराहरूमा पनि हामी धेरै पछाडि पर्छौँ। हामीले रियलाइज गरेकै कुरा हो। र विदेशमा बसेको ड्रेन भएका ब्रेनहरूलाई हामीले नेपालमा फकाइ ल्याएर 1 वर्ष पनि धान्न नसक्ने गरी जागिरको लोभ देखाएर ल्याउने त्यसले हामीले चल्न सक्दैन। तर जो जहाँ जस्तो अवस्थामा छन् आफ्नो आफ्नो कन्ट्रिब्युसन गरिरहेका छन् उहाँहरूसँग एउटा डिप्लोमेटिक मिसनबाट यसरी जानु पर्यो कि त्यो ब्रेन जुन ब्रेन एउटा स्टेजमा छ त्यहाँ त्यस्तै खालको ब्रेन नेपालमा पनि छ। त्यो दुईटा ब्रेनको बिचमा सर्कुलेसन कसरी गर्न सक्छ भन्ने कुरामा पनि डिस्कस गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। फर इक्जाम्पल अब कुनै एउटा सिमिलर लाइक इन्जिनियर कुनै एउटा फिल्डमा काम गरिरहेछ अथवा बायोटेक्नोलोजिस्ट कुनै विदेशमा काम गरिरहेछ नेपालमा पनि बायोटेक्नोलोजिस्ट उनीहरूलाई केही समयको लागि एक्सचेन्जमा ल्याउनु यो कुनै नयाँ कुरा मैले भनिरहेको छैन। तर त्यो जुन जागिर उहाँहरूले छोडेर यहाँ आउनुपर्छ देशको माया लाग्छ 2 महिना भए पनि काम गरौँ भन्ने लागिरहेछ हुटुटी त्यो 2 महिनाको समय चाहिँ त्यो ग्याप जुन छ त्यहाँ आफू विदेशमा बस्दाखेरि त्यो ग्याप चाहिँ नहोस् भन्नको लागि नेपालबाट त्यति नै इक्विभ्यालेन्टको ब्रेनलाई त्यहाँ ल्याएर राख्न र त्यहाँबाट नेपालमा आएर काम गर्न अनि त्यो सट्टापट्टा गर्दाखेरि जुन अब बिचको जुन मोडालिटीमा जानुपर्छ त्यसको बारेमा फर्दर कुरा गरौँला। त्यो सट्टापट्टा गर्न सकिन्छ कि सकिँदैन भइरहेको कुरा भनेको विदेशीहरू यहाँ आएर काम गर्छन् यहाँ आएर चाहिँ उहाँहरूले आफ्नो ब्रेन दिनुहुन्छ तर स्वदेशीहरू किन हामीले आफ्नो ब्रेन दिन सक्दैनौँ र त्यही बेला हामीलाई त्यो एक्सचेन्जमा उतातिर लैजान किन सकिँदैन यो कुरालाई डिप्लोमेटिक मिसनबाट जानुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। यही नै मेरो
आई रियली एप्रिसिएट दैट। क्विक अलिकति रिस्पोन्स गरौँ। एक्चुअली मेरो प्रेजेन्टेसनमा नेपालमा गएर 6 महिनामा बनाउने भन्ने कुरा केही पनि थिएन। अब डाक्टर आचार्यले कसरी त्यसरी सोचेर हुँदैन भनेर त्यसरी उहाँले कुरा गर्नुभएको। प्रेजेन्टेसनमा तपाईँले राख्नु भएको साइन्स एन्ड टेक्नोलोजी कोलाबोरेसनको कुराहरू अलिकति छ कुनै बेला यसो फुर्सद भयो भने पेपर पनि हेरिदिनु होला। तपाईँले भन्नुभएको सबै पोइन्ट्सहरूमा आई एम 100% इन एग्रिमेन्ट विथ वाट यु सेड। बाहिर बसिसकेपछि मान्छे पर्मानेन्टली फर्किने ग्रुपहरू थोरै हुन्छ तर ब्रेन सर्कुलेसनको कन्सेप्ट इज अल्सो एकदम एक्सट्रिमली इम्पोर्टेन्ट छ। सो दोज कमेन्ट्स आर रियली एप्रिसिएटेड।
Thank you, Dr. Adhikari. Would Mr. Ramacharya, Dr. Ramacharya want to respond? Because I think you actually said we cannot fix
Yeah,
it.
just to clarify, I hope I did not misspoke.
अलिकति यतातिर जाउँला हात उठाउनु भएको छ प्रीतिजीले अलिकति डिस्ट्रिब्युट गरौँ कुराहरु।
Just I want to clarify, मैले 6 महिनामा नेपाल बनाउन सकिन्छ भनेको होइन। डाक्टर अधिकारीको प्रेजेन्टेसनमा पनि त्यो छैन। What I wanted to say, I think I hope I said is कहिलेकाहीँ हामी पनि त्यसरी सोच्छौँ हामी बाहिर बसेकाले पनि त्यसरी सोच्नु हुँदैन हामीले पनि नेपाल अन्डरस्ट्यान्ड गर्नुपर्छ। We have to fix Nepal in 6 months. Let's learn about Nepal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's move to Preeti. Preeti, go ahead. If we'd appreciate if you could really package the question in a short and succinct manner.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Khadka, Dr. Ambika, Adhikari. I actually wanted to share some comments, and I think some of the kura uthakuruko चाहिँ few of direct solutions त नभनौँ तर some things that we're working on. So about 5 months ago चाहिँ I'm in New Jersey अहिले. I started this community. It's called the Great Nepali Diaspora, right? So basically चाहिँ मेरो thought process and people that I've talked to हामीहरु सबैजनाको understanding चाहिँ के थियो भने नेपालीहरुको we have really good social connections. तर professional level मा त्यो छैन हैन। We have this running joke which says like नेपालीहरु चाहिँ we have a lot of momo parties तर mentorship parties हुँदैन। We don't really talk about collaboration and partnership and things like that हैन। So हामीले चाहिँ some things त्यसको बारेमा गर्न try गरिरहेछौं जुन यहाँ अहिले कुराहरु निस्किरहेछ हैन। जस्तो for example in terms of your brain circulation को कुरा and so on मा। So हाम्रो चाहिँ within 5 months, we've actually, we have 1,000 plus members, 40 different places around the world, chapters around the world and so on. And few of the initiatives, हामीले गरिरहेको चाहिँ exactly that यहाँ कुरा भएको छ। जस्तो for example, we also believe that, as much as हामीहरु सबैजनालाई नेपाल फर्केर के गर्नु मन छ, it's not possible for all of us. But the best thing we can do is also open up access. Right? The knowledge transfer कसरी गर्ने, open up resources to people in Nepal and so on भनेर. So हामी so few things हरु गरिरहेछ and I'm interested to learn more from everybody in terms of यही collaboration को केसमा and everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's move to Mr. Bijesh Mishra. If you've got a question, sir.
नमस्ते म चाहिँ विजेश मिश्र हाल चाहिँ म पोस्ट डक्टरल रिसर्चरको रूपमा चाहिँ कार्यरत छु। सो मैले मेरो एउटा सानो चाहिँ धारणा के भने नेपालमा अब डायस्पोरा अथवा नेपालकै रिसोर्सलाई युज गर्दाखेरि पनि एउटा चाहिँ कसरी युज गर्ने भन्नेको कन्ट्रीको नेसनल फ्रेमवर्क छैन कि फर इक्जाम्पल हामी एउटा एग्रिकल्चर एक्सपर्ट आयो भने त्यसलाई चाहिँ एग्रिकल्चरमा चाहिँ लिएर जानुपर्छ भन्ने आउँछ अर्को इन्डस्ट्रियल एक्सपर्ट आयो भने इन्डस्ट्रीमा चाहिँ लिएर जानुपर्छ भन्छ तर हामीले त्यो सबै कुरा जुन चाहिँ हामीसँग फुडको निड छ अनि त्यसपछि ल्यान्डको चाहिँ अब एलोकेसन फरेस्टदेखि लिएर ट्रान्सपोर्टेसनदेखि लिएर हरेक कुरा त्यो डिफ्रेन्ट सेक्टरमा चाहिँ डिभाइड गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ ती सेक्टरमा चाहिँ कसरी कतिलाई चाहिँ पपुलेसनलाई कतिमा अप्टिमाइज गरेर कतिसम्म चाहिँ ल्यान्डलाई चाहिँ हामीले कसरी एलोकेट गर्ने र कति ल्यान्डको चाहिँ कम्पेरेटिभ एडभान्टेज कति छ भन्ने कुरामा आई थिङ्क त्यो नेसनल लेभलमा नआउँदासम्म एउटाले अर्कोले एउटा डायस्पोरा अथवा एउटा चाहिँ सेक्टरले गरेको इफोर्ट चाहिँ अर्को सेक्टरले क्यान्सल आउट गर्दाखेरि वी आर स्ट्याग्नेन्ट मैले चाहिँ पछिल्लो समय लगभग यो विषयमा नेपालमा चाहिँ कसरी के गर्न सकिन्छ भन्ने विषयमा चाहिँ अलिकति सोच्दाखेरि अहिले यो कन्क्लुजनमा पुगेको छु पछिल्लो समय चाहिँ सो आई जस्ट वान्ट टु सेयर दिस अनि अर्को कुरा प्रीतिजीलाई पनि मैले लिङ्क्डइनमा पनि कनेक्ट गर्न खोजेको थिएँ तर कनेक्ट भएको छैन अब आई वान्ट टु बी कनेक्टेड प्रीतिजी लेट्स डिस्कस हाउ वी क्यान कनेक्ट अनि IIDS मा पनि हाउ वी क्यान कनेक्ट लेट्स कनेक्ट विथ इच अदर म त्यही कुरा
Someone will get back to you, Bijesh. Thank you. Let's take one question from the chat box. It's a very interesting question, Dr. Adhikari. So Mr. Aryan Rizal says, in Nepal, a significant proportion of the inflow from remittances is going towards funding our imports, mainly to India and China. How can we incentivize spending in a way that a larger proportion of this money, instead of going to imports, stays in Nepal and goes towards the consumption of local goods, services, investments, spending on education, healthcare sectors, etc. So, Dr. Adhikari, would you want to respond?
Thank you, Dr. Khadka, and thank you for that question. I'm not the best expert on that, but मैले मेरो प्रेजेन्टेसनमा दुईवटा के राखेको थिएँ भने एउटा डायस्पोरा बन्ड राखेको थिएँ त्यो धेरै अफ्रिकन कन्ट्रिजहरू अरू कन्ट्रिजहरूमा पनि राखिरहेको छन् कि बाहिरबाट गएको पैसा र डायस्पोराले पनि आफूलाई पनि लङ टर्म इन्भेस्टमेन्ट पनि र त्यो बन्डले चाहिँ कन्ट्रीमा इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाउने टाइपको त्यो इस्युजहरू हुन् अहिले नेपालमा भइरहेको कुरा एक्ज्याक्टली राइट कन्ज्युमर गुड्सहरुमा धेरै कुराहरू खर्च भएको छ अथवा रियल इस्टेटमा खर्च भएको छ अनि त्यो चाहिँ अब नेपाल गभर्नमेन्टको आफ्नो पोलिसिजको कुराहरू भयो तर हामीले हेर्दाखेरि त्यसलाई डिफ्लेक्ट गर्ने जस्तो इन्डियामा पनि डायस्पोरा बन्ड र अरू किसिमको इन्भेस्टमेन्टको अपर्च्युनिटिजहरू चाहिँ खोलेको छन् अरू इस्टाब्लिश डायस्पोरा जस्तो अघि चाइनाको मैले अलिकति कुरा गरेको थिएँ एक्सप्यान्ड गर्दाखेरि चाइनाले बाहिरको इन्भेस्टमेन्टमा उनीहरूले चाहिँ हाई टेक्नोलोजी अथवा इनोभेटिभ फिल्डहरुमा फर्केको मान्छेहरूले पनि के नलेज लिएर आउँछन् त्यसरी उनीहरूले सुरु गरेको थिए सो द्याट समथिङ अब नेपालमा पनि यो कुरा त अलि फाटोफुटो भइरहन्छ जस्तो अघि डाक्टर मास्कले पनि भन्नुभयो कि फर्केर गएर केही गर्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ रहन्छ अनि प्रीतिजीको कुरामा मैले के जोडेँ भने उहाँले गर्नुभएको इनिसिएटिभ चाहिँ एकदमै टु द ग्राउन्ड अनि सलिड उहाँले चाहिँ बिजनेस मेन्टरिङ अथवा चाहिँ कुन किसिमको रिलेसनसिपहरू इन्भेस्टमेन्टहरू राख्न सकिन्छ एन्टरप्रेन्योरसिप कसरी राख्न सकिन्छ भनेर गर्नुभएको छ आई थिङ्क यसरी नै बिल्डअप हुने होला आई थिङ्क द्याट विल बी अ वन्डरफुल थिङ टु थिङ्क अबाउट not to spend all that money only on consumerism but for the long term development.
Thank you, Dr. Adhikari. Any last question anyone would like to ask or type if they've got anything that they'd like to ask Dr. Adhikari directly? We've got 2 more messages. I was trying to do. Okay, thank you for that. Question Nepal. Okay, time. Okay, so maybe because we've already spent an hour and 15 minutes, so maybe we should also come to an end of this wonderful session. So once again, on behalf of IIDS, I really want to thank Dr. Ambika Adhikari for such a fascinating presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested in what Dr. Adhikari talked about, in fact, the paper is already out. It's publicly available. And also, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone else for attending. I can see that there was a lot of interest. And of course, there would be such an interest because, of this very important topic. So have a wonderful afternoon, evening, or morning, ladies and gentlemen, and hope to see you next month. Next month, we'll be again coming back with something related to Nepal's education. So once again, Dr. Adhikari, thank you. Once again, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, have a great evening, morning, or, afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.